All right, hey everyone. Today we're going to be talking about web testing and debugging. So kind of like the testing maybe if you're in fundies you've been talking about, but today we're going to be relaying it to web applications. So there's a few differences between testing that you might be doing for CS assignments. Again, if you're doing those, if not, no worries. And we're going to be talking about the libraries and technologies that are used to do that and some strategies and also why we do that in the first place. It's not just something we do because we're supposed to, like there's actually, well, it kind of is to some extent, but there's also a lot of good reasons for doing it. So presenting today is going to be myself and Will Stenzel, who can introduce himself in a moment. We're going to be your presenters and talking about our experience and sharing. So, well, I didn't really give, if you want to give like a quick intro.
Oh yeah. Hey everyone, I'm Will, fourth year computer science major. And I guess a fun fact about me is this semester I'm taking a leave of absence to travel around in my minivan. So I'm in St. Louis right now and I'm slowly heading back to California.
Nice. Will's also a Mr. Idea guy, so he's the original conceiver of the Oasis idea. And yeah, so myself, workshop coordinator for Oasis, Corey College 23. And a fun fact about me is that I can juggle 2 balls at a time. So today we're going to be talking about web testing as we've established. And first we're going to start talking about what testing is. Some of us know already, but we'll go through that really quickly. Why we do it, and then finally why we test on the web. And I think someone might have them. Thanks. Okay, and then we're gonna take some questions, do a quick Kahoot, and then we're gonna do an interactive part. So let's get started. What is testing? Like I said, many of us probably know, but it's basically testing is code that we write to test other code that we've written to make sure that the other code we've written works. And so they're often run automatically when we run our application, but that's pretty much all you need to know. In a nutshell, it's code that we write to make sure other code functions. So over here on the right are some code you might be familiar with if you're taking fundies. The bottom is a Racket code test. The top is a Java JUnit one. I think it's using OOD. So that's what it looks like in that instance. But it's not just for fundies. So it's something that people do in class a lot, but it's also something that's used outside of class in the so-called real world, and also in something that is advised for making personal projects, because it's just going to make it easier for you in the long run. So let's talk about why we test web apps a little bit more. So it's not something super intuitive. It's really not easy to do. It's sometimes easier to just kind of forge ahead and build your whole app and not really test too much, because it takes some time. But it's still needed for the following reasons. Number one, it makes it easier to protect against mistakes. So tests are meant to verify your code functions as expected, and everyone does it. And a failed test is a little bit easier to spot than your app just not working and you having to backtrack through your code and figure out where the code actually broke. So it just makes it easier on us as developers to write code that works well, especially since a lot of these libraries do run them automatically every time you run the whole program. So anytime you run the code, you'll notice if a test passes or not. Okay, the second reason is it's easier to protect against Nope, that was the first reason. The second reason is it prevents you from introducing bugs, kind of similar to the first one. But since tests are run automatically, if you have a test that passes earlier and then you write some new code and it breaks old functionality, well, that test that passed earlier is now going to fail. And so then that's how you'll know immediately that your new code somehow messed things up elsewhere in the app. And so that's why it's good to have these in place, because these kind of bugs are pretty hard to find otherwise. For example, if you're taking fundies 2 yet, you may have learned about mutations, so that can lead to some unexpected changes. you're not familiar with that though, no worries. Okay, the third reason is this is maybe something you might find more down the line, but if you're working with a code base that has a bunch of tests already written for the code in it, just makes it a whole lot easier to figure out what the heck is going on, because those tests will tell you what the functions are supposed to return. So it makes collaboration easier. Especially if you're working on a group personal project now with an Oasis or outside, writing tests makes it easier for other people to understand your code and for you to understand other people's code. Okay, so all in all, tests are necessary if you want to develop professionally. Well, yeah. So what that means is in a professional setting, almost every company will be using tests. But also for your own personal projects, it helps you write more maintainable code. So it's not just for your fun to use assignments. Now, Will is going to talk more about how we actually test on the web.
All right, thanks, Chris. Do you want me to share my screen? Oh, all right. So without tests, the only way really to know if something goes wrong is printing to the console. So in JavaScript, it's console.log and system.out.print. And you guys are probably pretty familiar with this in the CS classes you could take, but it's not really optimal as the application grows. You start putting console logs everywhere, and it's still hard to figure out. So we'll go into the solution to that. Oh, Chris, I think you're muted if you're saying something.
It actually might make more sense for you to share your screen now. I just realized.
Right.
Since you'll be sharing later. Anyway.
Will do. All right. So let's jump into it. The testing solution. First testing solution is unit tests. So as Chris mentioned before, these are like JUnit, check expect, and the idea is that they test the small functions, the small units of your application. So if you have some logic where something should only happen when a certain condition is met, that would be a perfect case for a unit test. And we want to do two things when testing our code. The first is describe what code we're testing. This might seem simple, but when you're working with a team, it's extremely important to be very clear about what it is that you're testing, what it's supposed to accomplish, and what its purpose is. And then the second part is actually making assertions about what we expect. So this is the execution of the test. It should say, like if we go through this example, add 1 plus 2 equals 3. The expectation is that the sum of 1 and 2 should be 3. So both of these are pretty straightforward, but they are very important as well. So how do we do this in JavaScript, for example, if we have a web application? JavaScript doesn't have a native way. It's not built in to the JavaScript runner in the browser, so we need a library to do this. Some of those libraries could be Mocha, Jasmine, Karma, and Jest, which is what we'll be using today in the demo. So Jest solves the problems we mentioned before. It's super compatible. It integrates really well with React, and simple syntax and good documentation. It's probably the most popular of the testing frameworks. So switching gears here, well, what if you don't want to test just the small pieces of your application? What if you kind of want to get a sense of like, is the whole application working? And that's where end-to-end testing comes in. So this is testing the whole product basically throughout all the different user flows, and it simulates how a user would actually interact with this. So if this is a screenshot of an end-to-end test, so you could kind of see how some of the stuff is like we're kind of walking through what a user would do. This is an example from the Offstars app, which I'll actually be showing in the next slide, where I'm talking about my experience in the applications that I've worked on. So let's take a look here. This is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Office Hours app, but if you're in Fundies 1, Fundies 2, or OOD, you should have used this before. So this was a pull request that I created. And what's cool about tests is once you get them, like Chris said, they're super useful. You know, it doesn't cost you anymore to run them. So for each pull request you do, we have all these tests that are being run. I mean, we have the end-to-end tests. We have like our regular like unit tests. And if we check out like the Cypress test, which is the framework that we use to do end-to-end, we can actually see what one of these tests look like. So if I scroll down here, we can pull up this video. And this here is actually going through just as the user would interact with the code. You can see they're creating a question, and we're testing that it can't be finished until both fields are complete. And it's actually super cool that you can do this. You can kind of like automate the browser and what the user's doing. And it's actually not that hard to do. If we look at the test that just ran, so we're visiting the page with the queue. We're clicking the join queue button by like get body should contain join queue. We're getting the button, clicking. You might be wondering what this Percy snapshot is. This is actually pretty cool. This is a little bit more advanced, but once you have end-to-end tests, you know all the different screens that you're going to be viewing. So what Percy allows you to do is actually review if there's any visual changes between those screens. You can review them and then put it into the CI like we had before, and it just makes it really easy to know when any sort of changes are made to the application. And it also can help find things that you might miss with regular integration tests. But the idea here is, yeah, you're just acting as a user, and where the assertions are right here. You can see the banner should contain this. It should also contain the question text. So that's just a quick overview of like my experience testing. I've also done we do integration tests and unit tests, but I hope that was helpful.